It's such a wonderful machine to fly because it turns, slip, side slip, do all of the things that you had to do in combat so easily.
I'm very proud of the fact that I was involved in the design and the development of the aircraft.
It is the most beautiful aircraft I have ever flown in my life, and it was a fighter.
The Supermarine Spitfire, a powerful symbol of defiance and victory during the Battle of Britain. Fast, agile, and beautifully sleek, the Spitfire represented the cutting edge of RAF fighter command in its legendary fight against Hitler's Luftwaffe. With over 23,000 Spitfires produced, it was the only Allied fighter to stay in production throughout the entire war. The aircraft's design was so advanced that development continued through 24 marked numbers, most of which entered actual production. Few Spitfire variants were unsuccessful, a rare achievement in fighter development history. Supermarine and Rolls-Royce collaborated so closely that only two engine types, the Rolls-Royce Merlin and Griffin, powered the Spitfire. The diversity of roles the Spitfire performed during World War II exceeded all expectations. It served as a fast interceptor, high and low altitude reconnaissance plane, and tactical fighter bomber, proving the brilliance of its original design. Yet, the Spitfire's inception was risky. While the Hawker Hurricane reflected traditional aircraft construction, the Spitfire was a revolutionary design, born from the genius of one of aviation's greatest designers. Reginald Mitchell, chief designer at Supermarine, gained fame by creating high-performance seaplanes that won the Schneider Speed Trials for Britain 3 times between 1929 and 1931.
Mitchell was a brilliant designer. He was a very, very good leader. He was an easy man to get on with. He did have his occasional flare-ups, but one of his main advantages was that he was able to pick the right people to do the job.
Soon after, Mitchell's S-6B Racer, the fastest of his designs, set a world record by reaching 407 miles per hour.
As a man, I liked him enormously and respected him because he was tremendously well.
The Graf Zeppelin had flown around the world, while the massive 12-engine Dornier DO German aviators were celebrated as symbols of a national revival. The number of trained German airmen was increasing rapidly. 50,000 young Germans were members of gliding clubs, and Lufthansa, the state airline, was heavily subsidized. Its domestic services alone surpassed the global operations of all British and French airlines combined. Mitchell concluded that German rearmament would produce the most formidable air force in Europe. Conversations with young German aviators convinced him that Adolf Hitler would inevitably lead the country to war. For Mitchell, this realization sparked a relentless ounce of Mitchell's energy was now dedicated to creating a new fighter aircraft. He based his design around a highly promising engine being developed by Rolls-Royce. Derived from the R-series engines of the Schneider racers, the 1,025 horsepower PV-12, later renamed the Merlin, was central to Mitchell's plan.
He started to design an aircraft to his own ideas, which had 8 guns firing forward. It had an enclosed cockpit, retractable undercarriage, and all of the produced something with a very high speed. He had also introduced the concept of stressed skin construction, where in fact instead of just making a structure which is self-supporting of its own and then putting plating on it, the external plating actually took some of the stress as well. And that lesson was carried on into the design of what became the Spitfire.
His prototype fighter K5054 was completed well before Rolls-Royce resolved several cooling system issues. However, on March 5, 1936, K5054
a pilot, and he said, well, you can't volunteer to be a pilot. He said, you can volunteer to be aircrew. He said, and if you're good enough, you might become a pilot. So I said, all right, I'll volunteer for aircrew. So he said, right, well, what's your name and address, and what did your father do, and what's your job? So I said, well, I work at Supermarine. So he said, what do you do at Supermarine? I said, well, I'm an apprentice. Apprentice, he said. He looked me in the eye, and he picked up the piece of paper, and he just tore it in half, and he said, you go back to work, my son. He said, you're doing a better job there.
Since 1934, the British Air Ministry had been alarmed by intelligence reports indicating Germany was secretly building an air force with a planned strength of 4,000. In response to the growing threat, the RAF initiated a series of rearmament programs. With enough fighters, the German threat, particularly from its fast monoplane bombers, could be neutralized. One such figure was Air Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, newly appointed as Air Member for Supply and Research, Mitchell's Spitfire. One of the key requirements of the new specification, which would make Britain's next generation of fighters formidable, was that the aircraft be equipped with 8 wing-mounted machine guns. Initially, the Spitfire's stressed metal wing design posed significant manufacturing challenges. The complex techniques and specialized tools needed led to delays, but the end result was more than worth the effort. The curved wing shape maximized surface area for its. This design gave the Spitfire its incredible ability to make tight turns without the risk of structural failure. In fact, it could handle combat loadings of up to 9G. Mitchell's innovative wing design also greatly in minimizing drag. The low thickness-to-chord ratio made the Spitfire exceptionally stable during high-speed dives. Pilots who first flew the new aircraft were amazed by its performance, exceeding 300 miles per hour, and by how easily it could be flown, even by newcomers to the plane. Its stall characteristics in particular were forgiving, a crucial advantage in aerial combat. The test pilots were so impressed by the Spitfire prototype that even before its 7-day trial ended, and without a formal report, the Air Ministry placed an order for 310 aircraft. The first production Spitfire, K9787, took to the skies on May 14, 1938. Sadly, Reginald Mitchell did not live to witness Britain's confidence in his creation. In poor health and weakened by his efforts, Mitchell died of tuberculosis in June 19th.
On the people in the design department. And I remember, in fact, the day that he died, Black and I were working in the laboratory on something, I don't know what now. We both sort of stopped what we were doing, looked at one another, silenced for a bit, then got on with the job.
In August 1938, the first production Spitfires were delivered to the RAF's 19th Squadron at Duxford for evaluation. These early models were powered by the Merlin II engine and featured a 2-bladed fixed-pitch wooden propeller. They could reach 352 miles per hour at 19,000 feet and had a maximum climb rate of 2,420 feet per minute and could ascend to 20,000 feet in 9.4 minutes. Despite this impressive performance, it did not yet fully harness the Merlin engine's potential. After the 78th Spitfire rolled off the production line, the de Havilland Hamilton 2-pitch, 3-bladed metal propeller became standard, optimized for both takeoff and cruising. The Spitfire's takeoff distance was significantly reduced, but it wasn't until the summer of 1940, with the introduction of constant-speed propellers, that the Merlin engine could truly deliver its best performance. To accommodate the constant-speed propeller from the 175th Spitfire onwards, a modified engine, the Merlin III, was installed. In 1938, despite the boost of British rearmament following the Munich crisis, Spitfire production remained disappointingly low. Only 3 squadrons were equipped with the new fighter that year. Even with larger numbers of the slower but easier to produce Hurricane, Britain had only a fraction of the fighter force needed for sufficient home defense. That minimum fighter force was based on the assumption that Fighter Command would need to maintain continuous standing patrols during any conflict. However, standing patrols might not be necessary. Although still in its infancy, radar promised to revolutionize air defense. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, now head of Fighter Command, played a pivotal role in establishing Britain's radar defense network. The backbone of Dowding System was a series of radar stations known as Chain Home, capable of detecting enemy aircraft approaching the British coast from 40 miles away. However, exercises revealed that Chain Home could not detect low-flying aircraft. To address this, a second network called Chain Home Low was established, capable of detecting aircraft flying just above sea level from a distance of 30 miles. Together, these networks formed the world's first air defense radar system. Dowding's challenge was converting radar detections into actionable intelligence for directing Spitfires and Hurricanes. To solve this, he created filter centers tasked with distinguishing friendly aircraft from enemy ones. By taking cross bearings from 2 nearby stations, they can estimate the course of incoming intruders. Radar operators and plotters, often members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, became highly skilled at estimating target ranges, bearings, altitudes, and even numbers. Interceptions were controlled from plotting rooms at sector, group, and fighter command levels. Since the radar defense network couldn't track enemy aircraft once they crossed the British coast and moved inland, tens of thousands of observers were trained to report sightings of enemy aircraft in their sectors. This information was then relayed to Observer Corps headquarters at the appropriate filter center. Dowding's aim in designing such a complex detection and plotting system was to maximize the chances that every Spitfire and Hurricane sent into the air would intercept the enemy. All flights would be directly combat-related. His defensive network was completed just in time. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler's armies invaded Poland. As the Luftwaffe struck the Polish Air Force, destroying most of its fighters on the ground, and German bombers crippled Polish communications, it became evident that this was a new kind of warfare. Blitzkrieg tactics, where fast-moving armored units coordinated with a powerful air force, were a terrifying revelation. Over 700 miles from the battlefront, Britain could do nothing to aid its Polish allies. France, with the most powerful army in Europe and a shared border with Germany, was in a better position but failed to act decisively. Within weeks, Poland's defeat was inevitable. On November 18, 1939, 6 weeks after Poland's fall, the Supermarine Spitfire made its first mission over German territory. Ironically, this mission was in a role for which the Spitfire was never originally designed, but one in which it excelled: high-speed, high-altitude reconnaissance. Stripped of guns and ammunition, the RAF's reconnaissance Spitfires could soar to 35,000 feet, well beyond the reach of German flak, and fly faster than any enemy fighter. They swiftly transformed British photographic intelligence operations. By the end of 1939, in just 15 sorties, 2 Spitfires had covered 5,000 square miles of enemy territory without any losses. This marked the beginning of the Spitfire's distinguished career as one of the war's finest photographic reconnaissance aircraft. On May 10, 1940, the storm of Blitzkrieg struck France and the Low Countries. The offensive commenced with over 300 German bombers attacking 22 Allied airfields in northern France, Belgium, and Holland. The Belgian and Dutch air forces were obliterated on the ground, while the French faced significant damage. The next day, it was the RAF's airfields in France that came under attack. Despite facing relentless air assaults, the Hawker Hurricanes of the British Expeditionary Forces Air Component fought valiantly against overwhelming odds. The effect of the Hurricanes in slowing the Luftwaffe offensive was disproportionate to their numbers. However, with 1,000 Allied aircraft destroyed in just 2 days, and the French Air Force retreating to relative safety in the interior, defeat seemed inevitable. After the dramatic breakthrough by German armor at Sedan, which bypassed the defenses of the Maginot Line, the ground war was effectively lost. The French government implored for additional British fighters, but Sir Hugh Dowding, aware that any further losses would render Britain's future defense a hopeless endeavor, stubbornly resisted. Events quickly proved Dowding's judgment correct. By May 20th, France had been divided in two by a powerful German armored thrust. The British Expeditionary Force, along with the bulk of the French 1st and 7th Armies, found themselves trapped in a shrinking pocket around Dunkirk. The last RAF airfield in Belgium had already been abandoned. As German armor closed in on Dunkirk, the fate of 300,000 Allied soldiers seemed almost sealed. Yet, on May 24th, Hitler ordered his panzers to halt. Hermann Göring, chief of the Luftwaffe, buoyed by his victories, had assured Hitler that the German Air Force could, unaided, eliminate the remnants of the expeditionary force at Dunkirk. For the destruction of the Allied stronghold, the Luftwaffe assembled 300 bombers and 500 fighters, most of which were the formidable Messerschmitt 109E. The 109E was equipped with 2 fuselage-mounted MG-17 machine guns, each carrying 1,000 rounds, and 2 wing-mounted cannons, each with 60 rounds. Powered by the Daimler-Benz 601A engine, the 109E offered a very short takeoff and excellent climb capability. However, its performance at altitudes of 20,000 feet and higher was considerably better. Since the outbreak of the war, the Messerschmitt 109 had dominated the skies over Europe. Pilots of the 109 were convinced that wherever the aircraft engaged in combat, victory was assured. It was with this high confidence that the Luftwaffe set out to destroy the Allies at Dunkirk. What the German airmen had not foreseen was that, over the Dunkirk beaches, the Luftwaffe would encounter significant numbers of RAF Spitfires for the first time. Throughout Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk, 16 squadrons of Spitfires and Hurricanes flew at a time to disrupt the German attacks on the port area. Being able to spend only 15 minutes over the battle zone at combat speeds, the performance of the Supermarine Spitfire came as a severe shock to the Luftwaffe. Here was a fighter aircraft capable of meeting the Messerschmitt 109 on equal terms. It quickly became clear that the Spitfire's ability to outturn the 109 provided a crucial advantage in close combat. Additionally, the Messerschmitt's cannon did not prove to be the devastating weapon that the Luftwaffe had anticipated. Its low muzzle velocity and slow rate of fire often meant that a pass would result in very few rounds actually striking a fast-moving Spitfire. On the British side, the Spitfire pilots discovered that if their guns were harmonized to converge at 200 yards instead of the official 650 yards, their hitting power was more than sufficient to destroy a 109 in a single pass. In one significant regard, the Spitfire was incomparably superior to its German counterpart. The bubble-shaped hood of the Spitfire, during the air battles that raged over the Dunkirk beaches, RAF fighters destroyed 132 German aircraft, delivering a devastating blow to Goering's Luftwaffe. Many German attacks did manage to penetrate to the evacuation area and inflict heavy losses on ships and men. But without a doubt, the RAF emerged victorious in the Battle of Dunkirk. At great cost, the RAF had prevented the German bombers from annihilating the British Expeditionary Force along with all of Britain's hopes. Tragically, since the men on the ground had witnessed little of the fierce fighting occurring above them, many concluded that the RAF had abandoned them to their fate. For some time afterward, a significant amount of anger and bitterness developed between the British Army and the RAF pilots. The successful evacuation of 338,000 British and Allied soldiers from Dunkirk marked a turning point in the war. Its impact on British civilian morale was immeasurable, but for the fighter pilots of the RAF, it meant even more. Combat, the only true judge of an aircraft's worth, had proven the Spitfire to be an exceptional warplane. With an attempted invasion of Britain now an impending reality, survival would depend solely on the men and machines of RAF Fighter Command. Within 2 weeks of France's fall, Hitler and his generals began planning the conquest of Britain. Success would hinge primarily on the Luftwaffe winning control of the skies over the Channel and southern England. Hermann Goering, undeterred by his failure at Dunkirk, estimated that it would take only 4 days of intensive air operations by the Luftwaffe to overwhelm Britain's air defenses in the south of England. In just 4 weeks, the RAF could be utterly defeated. In preparation for the campaign, the Luftwaffe assembled 2,800 combat aircraft in France, Denmark, and Norway. Eagle Day, scheduled for early August, was to mark the start of the Great Offensive. Meanwhile, the RAF strength was to be gradually worn down. The bait designed to lure British fighters into costly dogfights with the Luftwaffe consisted of a series of bombing raids on southern English ports and Channel convoys. If the RAF scrambled its fighters to confront the German raiders, they would lose valuable aircraft to the 109 escorts. Conversely, if it chose not to engage, Britain would face significant losses in shipping. The Kanalkampf, as the German High Command dubbed the first phase of the Battle of Britain, began in earnest on July 10, 1940. The first major engagement involved an attack by 20 German bombers and 50 fighters on a convoy codenamed Bread, traversing the Dover Straits. Forewarned by radar, 30 British fighters, including Spitfires from 74 Squadron, intercepted the raiders. Soon after, 6 Spitfires from 64 Squadron joined the fray. In the ensuing dogfights, 3 German bombers were shot down, along with 3 109 fighters. On the British side, the losses included a lone Hurricane and 2 damaged aircraft, while 1 Spitfire made a crash landing. Tragically, 1 RAF pilot lost his life, and only a single ship from the convoy was sunk. For Fighter Command, the outcome of this first day's action was highly satisfactory, setting the stage for the intense battles to come. However, it became evident that adequately protecting all Channel convoys would quickly escalate costs. During the battle in France and over Dunkirk, the RAF had suffered the loss of 477 valuable fighters and nearly as many pilots. Britain now had only 19 squadrons of Spitfires and 29 squadrons of Hurricanes left. With a significant battle looming, Sir Hugh Dowding was determined to conserve his fighter resources, even if that meant allowing British ships to be sunk within sight of the English coast. This decision caused frustration among RAF pilots eager for combat, as future German attacks would be met with only a limited number of fighters. The priority was to focus on destroying German bombers while avoiding engagements with their escorts whenever possible. In the early weeks of the Battle of Britain, Fighter Command's steady accumulation of combat experience led to several valuable modifications for the Spitfire. An increasing number of Spitfires were outfitted with constant speed propellers, enhancing their rate of climb and significantly reducing engine wear. The introduction of the de Wilde incendiary bullet proved to be a valuable asset for marksmanship, greatly increasing the Spitfire's hitting power. Experienced pilots favored a mix of ammunition, loading 2 guns with standard bullets, 2 with armor-piercing rounds, and 2 with incendiary rounds. Many skilled Spitfire pilots believed that using incendiary rounds made the crucial difference between merely damaging an enemy aircraft and shooting it down. In addition to performance enhancements, new Spitfires offered better protection for their pilots. All Spitfires rolling off the production lines were now equipped with armor behind the pilot's seat as standard equipment, improving their chances of survival in the increasingly perilous aerial combat of the Battle of Britain. Just before the war, bulletproof windscreens were introduced for the Spitfires, despite initial reluctance from the Air Ministry. Sir Hugh Dowding, known for his commitment to pilot safety, managed to convince the authorities by arguing that, if bulletproof glass were deemed necessary for Chicago gangsters, it certainly should be for his fighter pilots. These enhancements to the Spitfire were welcomed by the pilots, but there was growing concern about how combat situations were unfolding. The RAF's tactical doctrines, which had remained unchanged since the early 1930s, began to negate many of the Spitfire's inherent advantages. The standard RAF formation was a VIC of 3 aircraft flying in close proximity. This close formation posed a high risk of collision, preventing pilots from effectively scanning their surroundings and taking full advantage of the Spitfire's excellent visibility. As a result, the Vic formations became particularly vulnerable to surprise attacks from enemy aircraft approaching at high speeds from above. Additionally, the tight formation of 3 aircraft was not sustainable during the chaos of aerial combat, often resulting in disintegration as the engagements unfolded. The inability to adapt tactics to the realities of modern air warfare posed a significant challenge for the RAF, especially as the Luftwaffe pressed its advantage. The need for more flexible formations and tactics that leverage the Spitfire strengths was becoming increasingly apparent. Despite the impressive capabilities of the Spitfire, any pilot flying solo remained exceptionally vulnerable. The Luftwaffe's tactics were significantly more effective for the realities of aerial combat. Their basic formation, known as the Swarm, was a well-spaced finger 4, allowing ample room for maneuvering and maintaining vigilance against enemy threats. In combat scenarios, the Swarm could easily break into flexible pairs, each consisting of a leader and a supporting wingman. By the end of July 1940, after 3 weeks of sporadic engagements over the English Channel and southern England, the RAF had inflicted substantial losses on the Luftwaffe, with 125 German aircraft destroyed. However, the majority of British successes were against German bombers, while the superior tactics employed by Luftwaffe pilots were exacting a toll on RAF fighters. In that same period, 32 Spitfires and 46 Hurricanes were lost, along with the lives of 50 RAF pilots. Despite these losses, changes to British fighter tactics occurred slowly. Many individual commanders began to adapt, moving away from the standard Vic formation in favor of the more effective Swarm. This shift marked a gradual evolution in the RAF's approach to combat, as pilots sought to maximize the advantages of teamwork and coordination in the face of the formidable Luftwaffe. Despite the tactical shortcomings of fighter command during the early weeks of the Battle of Britain, individual pilots demonstrated remarkable skill and courage, achieving extraordinary success in their Spitfires. Many of these pilots became legendary figures within the RAF, celebrated for their bravery and impressive combat records. Flight Lieutenant Alan Deere was one such pilot, renowned for his resilience. He not only survived multiple harrowing experiences, including being shot down and executing several forced landings, but also went on to destroy 17 German aircraft during the battle. And he concluded the war as a wing commander with a total of 22 victories. Sailor Malan, a South African ace, gained fame early in the war by shooting down 6 German aircraft within just 7 days during the Battle of France. By the end of the Battle of Britain, he had added 9 more victories to his tally, earning a bar to his DFC. Malan's total kills would reach 32 by 1941, along with recognition that included the Distinguished Service Order, DSO, and bar. Robert Stanford Tuck showcased his versatility by flying both Hurricanes and Spitfires during the battle, achieving a total of 12 confirmed kills. Although he initially showed little aptitude during training, his combat performance highlighted him as an exceptional fighter pilot. By the war's conclusion, Tuck had amassed 29 victories and earned both the DSO and 2 bars to his DFC. As the summer of 1940 transitioned from July to August, the Luftwaffe's assault began to wane. This decline in attacks was attributed not only to periods of adverse weather, but also to the German Air Force consolidating its strength in preparation for a significant offensive. The Luftwaffe's assault on Britain intensified dramatically starting August 12, 1940, marking a critical turning point in the Battle of Britain. The phase began with a series of increasingly severe raids, targeting British radar stations, airfields, and aircraft factories, which were essential for the RAF's defense. Eagle Day, as Hermann Goering named August 15, saw the Luftwaffe launch an unprecedented attack, executing more than 1,790 sorties in a single day across 5 major strikes. While RAF pilots demonstrated remarkable bravery, shooting down 75 German aircraft, the cost was steep. Fighter Command lost 30 Spitfires and Hurricanes, along with 17 pilots. By August 18, the situation had become dire, with Fighter Command having lost a total of 183 aircraft in combat, plus 30 more on the ground. These losses exceeded the rate at which the RAF could replace them, leading to a precarious situation. Even more alarming was the attrition of experienced personnel. Losses among squadron and flight commanders reached critical levels, and replacement pilots were being thrust into combat with minimal training. If this pattern of attrition continued, Fighter Command faced the grim reality of being utterly decimated within a matter of weeks. A temporary lull in operations due to bad weather offered little solace, as the Luftwaffe soon resumed its offensive with renewed vigor. Between August 24th and September 6th, they averaged nearly 1,000 sorties a day, relentlessly testing the limits of Fighter Command's endurance. During this harrowing period, RAF pilots fought against overwhelming odds, and the cumulative strain of relentless combat began to take its toll. As Fighter Command faced what seemed to be an inevitable extinction, Sir Hugh Dowding's call for a miracle was answered on September 7, 1940. On that day, 1,000 German aircraft, including over 300 bombers, assembled for the Luftwaffe's first significant raid on London. Adolf Hitler, enraged by recent RAF attacks on Berlin, had ordered Hermann Göring to concentrate efforts on destroying the British capital. While this offensive would bring tragedy to thousands of Londoners, it ultimately became a pivotal turning point for Fighter Command. With the focus of the German air campaign shifting to a single, predictable target, the pressure on RAF airfields was relieved. This change allowed exhausted pilots to reduce the number of sorties they flew while still meeting the Luftwaffe in greater strength. During the second phase of the battle, from September 7 to September 15, RAF fighters could engage the German air fleets with numbers as high as 300 at a time. Luftwaffe airmen, previously confident that the RAF was down to its last 50 Spitfires, were taken aback by the British response. As the Luftwaffe's bombers faced increasing resistance, Hermann Göring, frustrated by his bombers' significant losses, ordered the Messerschmitt 109 escorts to remain close to the bombers at all times. This directive limited the fighters' ability to maneuver freely and left them vulnerable as they were unable to engage in effective dogfights. The Spitfires, with their superior agility and tight turns, were granted a crucial advantage in the ensuing skirmishes. In the 9 days culminating on September 15, the RAF achieved a significant victory, shooting down 321 German aircraft at the cost of 174 British fighters. By this time, British production of Spitfires and Hurricanes had ramped up to the extent that it was outpacing the losses sustained in combat. The implications of this decisive turn in the battle were not lost on Adolf Hitler. The Luftwaffe's failure to achieve air superiority over Britain became evident, and this realization marked a significant shift in the strategic landscape of the war. With the RAF demonstrating resilience and superiority in combat, the Battle of Britain began to turn in the favor of the British, laying the groundwork for continued resistance against the Nazi threat. The Supermarine Spitfire's legacy was solidified during and after the Battle of Britain, where it not only played a crucial role in defending Britain, but also became a symbol of resilience and determination. The Spitfire II introduced significant upgrades over its predecessor, enhancing its combat effectiveness. Powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin 12 engine, the Spitfire II provided a notable increase in horsepower, reaching 1,175 horsepower which improved both speed and climb rates. Most variants were armed with 8 303 Browning machine guns Mark IIA, while a number of Mark IIBs were equipped with 2 20mm Hispano cannon, significantly enhancing its firepower against enemy aircraft. Despite the introduction of the Spitfire II, the next variants, Marks III and IV, did not see full-scale production. In January 1941, the Messerschmitt 109F entered Luftwaffe service, proving significantly superior to the Spitfire II at altitudes above 20,000 feet. In response, Supermarine upgraded the design by fitting the Merlin 45 engine to a strengthened Spitfire 1 airframe, resulting in the creation of the Spitfire V, which would become the most numerous of all Spitfire marks. The Spitfire V entered service in February 1941, boasting a top speed of 375 miles per hour and an operating ceiling of 36,500 feet. To enhance roll rate and speed at low levels, some aircraft featured clipped wingtips. By this time, the various subtypes of the Spitfire were classified based on the type of wing fitted. The A-wing configuration mounted 4 303 Browning machine guns, while the B-wing could accommodate a single 20mm Hispano cannon alongside 2 machine guns. The C-wing was the most versatile, allowing for multiple configurations. It could carry either 2 cannon, 1 cannon with 2 machine guns, with the second cannon muzzle fairing blanked off, or the original 4 machine guns. This adaptability made the Spitfire V a formidable adversary in the skies over Europe. This Spitfire V played a crucial role in turning the tide during the Battle of Malta in mid-1942. The island, positioned strategically along the Axis lines of communication between North Africa and Italy, was a prime target for German and Italian bombers. The successful defense of Malta established a vital RAF base for offensive operations against Axis airfields. From Malta, the Spitfire made its debut as a fighter-bomber during the summer of 1942, with the Mark V-C variant serving with great success in the Mediterranean and northern fronts throughout the war. In 1942, Allied airmen increasingly encountered the German Focke-Wulf 190, which decisively outclassed the Spitfire Mark V, the finest fighter in service at that time. Although a small number of Mark VI aircraft had been produced, it was evident that only a radically improved version of the Spitfire could effectively combat the Focke-Wulf threat.
We also had to make sure that we were keeping one step ahead of the enemy. And when the Focke-Wulf 190 came around, we had to increase the maneuverability of the aircraft. We actually added power-assisted ailerons. Like the power-assisted steering you got on your motor car now, but we were doing that on airplanes long before they thought of putting them in motor cars.
8 and 9, with the Mark IX becoming the most numerous. The Spitfire Mark IX combined the Merlin 60 series engine with a 5C airframe, featuring a 2-stage supercharger with an aftercooler. This innovation enabled the aircraft to achieve a top speed of over 400 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 44,000 feet. In 1944, many Mark IXs were upgraded with a new wing design known as the E-type, which housed a 20mm cannon and a 50 caliber machine gun. No German or Japanese aircraft could withstand the firepower of 2 50 caliber machine guns, and combined with the Mark IX's exceptional performance, this made it an immensely powerful fighter. The Mark IX Spitfire remained in production long after it had been outperformed by newer variants. By the end of the war, a total of 5,739 Mark IXs had been built. Among these, one of the most unusual was a seaplane conversion that successfully completed trials in 1943, reminiscent of the Spitfire's origins in the Schneider Cup races. However, this seaplane variant was never put into production. Following the Mark IX, the next significant development was the Mark XIV, which was powered by a Rolls-Royce Griffin engine. The Griffin had been first fitted to an experimental Spitfire Mark IV in late 1941. The Mark XIV was introduced in October 1944 and featured a Griffin 65 engine rated at 2,035 horsepower, necessitating a 5-bladed propeller to harness its immense power. The Mark XIV boasted a maximum speed of 439 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 43,000 feet, making it undoubtedly the most potent Spitfire of the war. It also marked the final evolution of the Spitfire during World War II. The Spitfire Mark XVIII, a strengthened and upgraded variant of the Mark XIV, was introduced just as the war came to an end. It represented the latest fighter development of the original Spitfire airframe. Subsequent variants, the Spitfires 21 to 24, were nearly entirely new aircraft, sharing few components with their predecessors. Even Reginald Mitchell's original wing design underwent radical changes. In March 1954, Mark 18Es flew the final offensive sorties by Spitfires in RAF service in Malaya, marking the end of a remarkable career that lasted an astonishing 16 years. This legacy stands as a testament to one of the most inspired designs in the history of military aviation.
The Hawker Hurricane. Often overshadowed by the sleek and slender Spitfire, it was in many ways Britain's greatest fighter of World War II. While most of the glory went to the Spitfire, the robust and dependable Hurricane did most of the work. Never considered a world beater, it had that remarkable quality of being just good enough, and sometimes better. At the time of Britain's greatest crisis, Hurricanes withstood the onslaughts from Germany, Italy and Japan. Like the American P-39, P-40 and F-4F Wildcat, it was one of the early fighters that manned the ramparts and turned the enemy aside. For 3 precarious years, it held the line and bought the Allies valuable time. Without it, Britain would certainly have lost the war. Indeed, the Hurricane flew and fought in more campaigns, on more fronts and in more countries than any other aircraft of World War II. From the first day to the last, the Hurricane was there. This is the story of the remarkable Hawker Hurricane. Germany, 1933. Hitler and his group of thugs take power. Rearmament soon follows. Hitler orders new fighters and bombers for the newly formed Luftwaffe. Tanks, submarines and battleships soon follow. Europe, fearing another war, reacts cautiously. In Britain, calls for a massive rearmament program are shouted down by those seeking appeasement. Just as Hitler begins to consolidate his grip on power, Sydney Camm, Hawker's chief designer, opens discussions with the Air Ministry for a new monoplane fighter, developed from the Fury biplane. Official support proves elusive, but Hawker's board backs their chief designer and approves development of the Fury monoplane as a private venture. Estimated to have a top speed of just 280 miles per hour, the Fury monoplane is soon abandoned. In October 1934, Rolls-Royce announces the development of the PV-12 liquid-cooled engine, the Merlin prototype. Sydney Camm is forced to abandon the Fury and creates a new aircraft capable of handling 1,000 horsepower. The Hawker Interceptor monoplane is born. 1934. The RAF is still largely equipped with fabric-covered biplane fighters and bombers. Steel and aluminium have replaced wood, but the fabric, struts and open cockpits remain. In May 1935, German rearmament accelerates. In response, the British government votes to triple the number of frontline combat aircraft. The move to the modern all-metal monoplane aircraft is, however, slow. February 21st, 1935. The Air Ministry places an order with Hawker for the first Hurricane prototype. For Hawker's designers, the temptation to embrace the new stressed skin construction techniques is tempered by the need to produce the fighter in great numbers. The methods that have served them since World War I would have to be used. As a result, the new Hurricane is constructed using established concepts, modified to suit the new requirement. Mike Potter, founder of Vintage Wings, an organization dedicated to the preservation and restoration of historic aircraft, sees a link between the Hurricane and Hawker's earlier biplanes.
We also have under restoration a Hawker Fury of the early 30s era. And they're not in the same hangar at the present time, but the Fury under restoration, fuselage, and the Hurricane, if we put them side by side, you'd be hard-pressed, except for the 50% difference in size, to see which airplane it belonged to. So the Hurricane fuselage really does hark back to a post-First World War construction technique.
The decision to go with the old-style biplane construction was to hasten mass production, and in that sense it was probably a good choice. They needed to get the contract and they needed to produce fighters. One of the advantages is that the airplane's very inspectable and maintainable. You can almost take the sides off this fuselage with a screwdriver, and getting inside of it is a lot easier than it is with a conventional monocoque airplane that's built like an egg. But it is also labor intensive. The interior steel structure is surrounded by a wooden structure, which is surrounded by fabric over most of the airplane, and that takes a lot of different materials and skill sets.
Work on Hawker's monoplane fighter is swift. 9 months later, on November 6th, the first Hurricane takes flight. 3 months later, a top speed of 328 miles per hour is attained, making it the world's first fighter to exceed 300 miles per hour in level flight. On June 3rd, 1936, the Air Ministry orders 600 Hurricanes. 1937. The RAF's last biplane fighter enters service 2 years after the first flight of the Hurricane. As a biplane fighter, the Gloucester Gladiator is well equipped, with an enclosed cockpit and 4 .303-inch Browning machine guns. Its overall performance, however, is well below that of the Hurricane. Fortunately for the RAF, there were more Hurricanes in service than Gladiators at the outbreak of the war. RAF Norfolk, 1938. Number 111 Squadron is the first RAF unit to receive the new Hurricane. Here we see them showing off their new mounts for the cameras. Though excited to take them into the air, new pilots still had to be vigilant during their first flights.
The Hurricane's not the easiest airplane to fly. It requires a little bit of technique, and I was surprised at how much work there is. Perhaps easiest to start on the ground, because it almost misleads you. On the ground, the Hurricane is a very well-behaved airplane. The gear is wide, the field of view over the nose is good enough that you can almost see where you're going. You still S-turn, as you always do in a tailwheel airplane, but the sense of the airplane at first is very forgiving and conventional, and I had pretty high expectations. When you first get it into the air, the Hurricane requires a fair amount of attention. The controls are a little bit stiff in terms of friction. It certainly doesn't give you the impression of being a terribly stable airplane. And I was surprised that it's almost impossible to trim the airplane off so that you can release your hands from the controls in a Hurricane. So the result was that it felt a little wobbly.
The first Hurricane Mark I's were equipped with the two-bladed fixed-pitch Watts propeller and fabric-covered wings. This caused some early problems. During high-speed dives, the wing gun panels would partially blow out. Gun heating was also a problem, with guns freezing at heights above 15,000 feet. By 1939, the old Watts propeller was replaced by the de Havilland or Rotol constant speed units. Stressed skin metal wings were also being manufactured. These wings would replace the original fabric models on both the production line and all existing Hurricanes. Hurricane designer Camm and Spitfire designer R.J. Mitchell took vastly different directions when designing the wings of their respective aircraft.
The Spitfire and the Hurricane came from different design precedents, where the parts that were used and the design philosophy in the Hurricane came from the old Hawker biplanes. In fact, the interior wing construction is very similar to the way they were on the Fury and those. The Spitfire, on the other hand, Mitchell came to that design from the Schneider Cup racing seaplanes, and his aerodynamic mantra was about designing a razor-thin wing. In those days, he felt that the fastest airplane would have the thinnest wing, and so everything about the Spitfire was trying to keep the profile drag of the wing and the thickness to a minimum. His design compromise was there was barely enough room for the wheels in the Spitfire's wing. There was no room for fuel, and even mounting guns proved problematic. In the case of the Hurricane, the wing is thick as a conscious design choice to try to reduce weight. If you built a wing and decided that it needed to sustain, say, 8G, the weight of that wing panel would be lighter as the wing got thicker. Imagine a piece of paper. As it becomes thinner, it becomes much easier to flex the piece of paper. It loses its bending rigidity. And so one of the primary design considerations in Camm's mind was the empty weight of the airplane. A thick wing was to his advantage in terms of weight, not so much in terms of speed. Design, it's all about compromises.
September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. Britain and France quickly declare war, but do little to assist their Polish ally. As war rages in Poland, RAF Fighter Command readies for battle. 497 Hurricanes in 18 squadrons stand ready, with more on the way. Germany's early victory over Poland is followed by an 8-month period known as the Sitzkrieg, or Phony War. Britain uses this time to prepare for the inevitable onslaught. 4 squadrons of Hurricanes are sent to France to help bolster the British Expeditionary Force. Blitzkrieg. May 10, 1940. German forces invade France, Belgium and Holland. In France, the Luftwaffe targets over 50 airfields with great success. British government reaction is swift. 3 more Hurricane squadrons are sent to France. During the Battle of France, the Hurricane's first assignment was to target German bombers. Here, they proved very successful. But it also meant tackling the Luftwaffe's twin-engine fighter, the Messerschmitt Bf-110. The Bf-110 was a long-range strategic Zerstörer, destroyer. Its job? Clear a path through the enemy's defensive fighter screens and keep the bombers safe. As a fighter, the Bf-110 was ill-equipped to dogfight the Hurricane. For a fighter to be successful in aerial combat, speed, acceleration and maneuverability were key. The Bf-110 possessed the first 2, but was not nearly as nimble and could not accelerate as quickly as the Hurricane. For the Hurricane, the Battle of France was a short and frustrating affair. By the end of May, British troops were evacuating through Dunkirk, and much of northern France was in German hands. By midnight, June 2nd and 3rd, Operation Dynamo was completed. Of the 452 Hurricanes sent to France, just 66 returned to Britain. Not all of these were victims of combat, however. Many were destroyed on the ground, lost in accidents, or simply abandoned during the retreat. Hampered by outdated tactics, squadrons entered battle in rigid sections of 3 aircraft, forcing Hurricane pilots to fight at a distinct disadvantage. Despite all that, Hurricane pilots claimed at least 499 kills. Post-war German records would show 299 aircraft destroyed and 65 seriously damaged by hurricanes. Rest for the Hurricane pilots would be short. Flush with victory over France and the Low Countries, Hitler soon set his sights on Britain. By August 1940, the Luftwaffe moved 934 Bf-109Es to the Channel coast. This would be supplemented by 237 Bf-110s, along with 1,600 bombers. To meet this threat, the RAF had 29 squadrons of Hurricanes and 19 with Spitfires, for a total of 660 serviceable fighters. During the Battle of France, the Hurricane's main opponent had been the Bf-110. In the upcoming Battle of Britain, it would face the more deadly Bf-109E. As a single-seat fighter, the Bf-109 was all business. Swift and heavily armed with two 20mm cannon and two 7.92mm machine guns, it outperformed the Hurricane in almost every category.
Bf-109 seems to have been all about performance. It has a very small wing on a very small fuselage, and it is as close to a dart as they could get in the early fighter design. And in terms of speed, they certainly succeeded. It was faster than the Hurricane and even the early model Spitfires by a margin, but it came at the cost of maneuverability. Certainly sustained turn performance was much inferior to either British fighters.
But even with the Bf-109's advantages, the Hurricane managed to hold its own. Day after day, scramble after scramble, Hurricanes rose to meet the Luftwaffe. After 3 months of constant combat, the battle was coming to an end. Unable to destroy the RAF in the air and on the ground, Hitler turned his attention to London. September 15th, 1940. 1,200 Luftwaffe fighters and bombers begin a day-long attack on London. The RAF would be ready with 328 Hurricanes and 177 Spitfires. For the loss of 29 RAF fighters, the British managed to shoot down 57 Luftwaffe aircraft. While the loss ratio was 2-1 in the British favour, it was not the RAF's finest performance. By the end of September, the battle was all but over. Hitler's attempt to destroy the RAF had all but failed, ending any thought of invasion. For the Hurricane and the pilots who flew her, it was a triumph. Without the Hurricane, the Battle of Britain would have been lost. For the Hurricane, the numbers were impressive. Of the 1,185 Luftwaffe aircraft credited to RAF fighters, 656 were accounted for by Hurricanes, of which 222 were Bf-109s. Hurricane pilots would also face another foe. Eager to share in the spoils of victory, Mussolini dispatched 75 bombers and 50 CR-42 and G-50 fighters to take part in the Battle of Britain. 10 BR-20s, escorted by 40 CR-42s, were intercepted by the Hurricanes of No. 46 and 257 squadrons. It was a one-sided battle. 3 BR-20s and 3 CR-42s were shot down. 2 Hurricanes were slightly damaged. During the Battle of Britain, both Hawker factories at Brooklands and Langley were targeted by the Luftwaffe, with minor results. To further protect production facilities, a number of plants were moved underground. As part of the Shadow Factory scheme, Hurricane production was moved underground at Longbridge. Here, we see a newly completed Hurricane on a motorized ramp rising to the airfield above ground. How did the Hurricane compare to the Spitfire during the Battle of Britain? As a gun platform, the Hurricane was superior. The 4 Browning machine guns in each wing were grouped tightly together, giving it a better concentration of fire. It was also rugged and able to absorb more battle damage. But even with all that, the Spitfire was the clear superior. Faster, with a higher rate of climb and ceiling, it could outdive the Hurricane with ease.
One of the reasons the Spitfire is so satisfying to fly is that when it does come to putting it in a turn, whether for aerobatic reasons or because you're trying to feel out what its combat maneuvering capability would be, it doesn't take a lot of muscle to put a lot of G on the aircraft.
The Hurricane is the mirror image of that. The flight controls are quite stiff. There's a few pounds of breakout force to move the stick, and so doing anything precisely through friction is always a little bit more work than you'd like. As well, the Spitfire's stability is conventional and positive. For example, if you put the nose down in the Spitfire and accelerate, it will want to return to trim, and you'll feel yourself easing the stick forward as a consequence of its stability. The Hurricane doesn't seem to have that. If you point the nose down, the airplane will accelerate a little bit, but the stick doesn't tend to migrate because the airplane doesn't tend to return to trim. And then the last notable difference between Spitfire and Hurricane when you're maneuvering is attributable to that beautiful elliptical wing on a Spitfire, which was designed to minimize induced drag. The pilot sees that when he pulls G, turns and maneuvers as a tendency for the airplane to slow down. In the Spitfire's case, it's negligible. You can go into a maneuver at 240 indicated, pull lots of G, make a turn, come back out at your 240 knot entry speed, didn't cost you a thing. The big fat wing on the Hurricane isn't quite as elegant, and when you maneuver, it costs you speed.
In terms of combat effectiveness, the Spitfire was better. According to John Alcorn's statistical study of the Battle of Britain, which appeared in the July 2000 issue of Aeroplane Monthly, the Spitfire was 1.25 times more effective. The Spitfire also had the advantage of growth and design development. After the Battle of Britain, it was clear the Hurricane could no longer be improved. It would, however, soldier on in other roles. During the German Blitz of 1941, the Hurricane would be pressed into service as a night fighter with marginal results. Without airborne radar, intercepting a German bomber at night was extremely difficult. In the months following the Battle of Britain, the Hurricanes Mark II A and B were introduced. Powered by the Merlin 20 engine, the new Hurricanes were equipped with 12.303-inch Browning machine guns. The Mark IIB was the first to carry bombs and was capable of carrying two 250-pounders. Nicknamed Hurry Bombers, RAF Fighter Command could now take the fight to the Germans. Fighter-bomber sweeps were now the order of the day. Targets included airfields, trains and coastal shipping. But these low-level missions proved hazardous. Light flak and machine gun fire took a heavy toll. For the Germans, these raids proved more a nuisance than destructive. By the summer of 1942, 24 squadrons were flying Hurricane 2As or 2Bs. The Bf-109F. Introduced in the late fall of 1940, it would prove vastly superior to both the Hurricane and the Spitfire Mark I. The days of the Hurricane as a fighter over Europe were clearly over. But unfortunately for the Germans, the Hurricane still had a few more cards to play. During the Battle of Britain, the Hawker Hurricane proved a tenacious warrior, holding its own against Germany's best fighters. But soon, tenacity would not be enough to guarantee survival. As ever faster German fighters rose up against the RAF, the less agile Hurricane was clearly outmatched. For the Hurricane to remain relevant in the struggle against Hitler, Hawker would have to reinvent their sturdy fighter. Introduced in the spring of 1942, the Hurricane Mark II-C was the most heavily armed single-seat fighter in RAF service. Its four 20mm Hispano cannons packed a considerable punch. Analysis from the Battle of Britain showed the .303-inch machine gun armament to be clearly inadequate. German bombers, like the Junkers Ju-88, were difficult to shoot down. Equipped with self-sealing fuel tanks and armor plate, they could absorb a vast amount of .303-inch ammunition and remain flying. The new Mark IIC packed a hefty punch. Total rounds carried was 364. Pilots were told to fire short bursts only. Long bursts would slow the aircraft down considerably. One can only speculate as to what the results might have been if the Hurricane had been equipped with 4 cannon during the Battle of Britain. The Mark IIC was also modified to carry a pair of 250 or 500-pound bombs or a pair of 44-gallon drop tanks. The increased armament offered the Hurricane a new lease of life. By the autumn of 1941, the Hurricane's performance shortcomings excluded it from most daylight operations, but their numbers continued to increase. 57 home-based squadrons were now equipped with Mark II Bs and Cs. June 10th, 1940. Italy declares war on Britain and France. In North Africa and Egypt, the RAF's total fighter force consists of 3 squadrons of Gladiators and just 1 Hawker Hurricane. On the strategic island of Malta, 4 hastily assembled ex-Fleet Air Arms Sea Gladiators are all that stand against the Italian Air Force. On June 21st, 8 Hurricanes are ferried to the island via France. Shortly after, France surrenders, cutting this line of supply. To keep their lines of communication open, the British had to find a new way around interfering German or Italian forces. For the British, their advantage lay with their colonial possessions. Takoradi, 1940. Gold Coast of Africa. Preparations begin on a new airstrip. Takoradi would be the first stepping stone in a long ferry route across Africa to Cairo and Egypt. It was a hazardous journey. The first Hurricanes arrive in September 1940. Shipped straight from the UK, these crated Hurricanes were quickly offloaded, reassembled, and made ready for flight. After reaching Cairo, the ferry pilots would return to Takoradi aboard a BOAC Lockheed Lodestar or RAF Bombay transport. Prior to America's entry into the war, thousands of Americans would volunteer with both the RCAF and the RAF. The result was the first of 3 Hurricane-equipped Eagle squadrons. The initial squadron, number 71, formed in September 1940 and saw action in February 1941. 2 other squadrons would follow, and in September 1942, all 3 were officially transferred to the USAAF, becoming the 4th fighter group. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. America and Britain are now at war with Japan. To strengthen the air defenses of Malaya and Singapore, 51 crated Hurricanes are sent by sea, arriving on January 3rd. With its reputation still glowing from the Battle of Britain, it was expected the Hurricane would sweep the Japanese from the sky. That optimism was short-lived. The Hurricanes that arrived on January 3rd were not assembled until the 19th. By that time, Japanese forces were swiftly advancing down the Malayan Peninsula. In the skies above Malaya, Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars and Mitsubishi A6M0s quickly overwhelmed the small Hurricane force. By January 28th, of the original 51 Hurricanes, only 20 were left. On February 10th, the last 7 Hurricanes flew to Sumatra. 5 days later, Singapore surrendered to the Japanese. North Africa. Since March 1941, British anti-tank weapons had proven inadequate when dealing with the German Panzer III and IV tanks. The new 57mm anti-tank gun was in short supply. As army commanders pressed for a solution, the RAF offered the new Hurricane Mark II-D, the world's first anti-tank fighter. Armed with two 40mm Vickers S guns, the new Hurricane was capable of defeating any tank when attacking from the side or the rear. The Vickers S gun rate of fire was 100 rounds per minute, with a muzzle velocity of 1,870 feet per second. Each gun was equipped with 15 rounds of ammunition with a mix of high explosive and armor-piercing rounds. By the winter of 1942, the situation in Africa had settled down to an uneasy calm. During this period, No. 6 Squadron took delivery of its first cannon-armed Hurricanes. Urgency was paramount, and pilots immediately began low-level training. Testing revealed that in order to achieve success, it was necessary to approach the target horizontally and at very low level. To help with their aim, tracer ammunition from 2 Browning machine guns was used to judge distance. A captured German tank served as target practice. When these tactics were tried out during Exercise Spartan in March 1943, the results were very poor. This would be in sharp contrast to the outstanding success achieved with the same aircraft in the Western Desert. From June 1942 until May 1943, No. 6 Squadron flew a total of 319 anti-tank sorties. According to official records, 47 tanks, 5 armoured cars and 3 half-tracks were destroyed. Often, hits from the 40mm cannons only disabled an armoured vehicle. 126 other vehicles, including 103 trucks, were also hit or destroyed. But it came at a price. 47 Hurricanes would be lost, with 40 being shot down in action and 5 pilots killed in combat. Only 1 was shot down by a fighter. It was clear. Low-level ground attack was dangerous and costly. Unfortunately, the urgent need for new tank busters in North Africa left little time for the application of additional armour protection. The Hurricane's liquid-cooled Merlin proved extremely vulnerable to ground fire. A single rifle-caliber bullet in the oil, glycol tank or radiator was often lethal, especially at low level. The tank-busting Hurricane had other limitations. As a specialized weapon, targets were limited. The combat situation had to suit tactics as well. If tanks and vehicles were not caught out in the open, the tank-busting Hurricane would sit idle. By the end of 1943, 800 Mark II-Ds were delivered. While No. 6 Squadron's exploits were well known, 3 other squadrons, all based in England, used the tank-busting Hurricane with varying degrees of success. As a pure fighter, the Hurricane's performance no longer matched the newer BF-109G or FW-190. Their lack of speed was not Hawker's only problem. It no longer made economic sense to build and construct Hurricanes as frontline fighters.
Development of the Hurricane during the war was limited in part by the aerodynamic limitations of a thick wing, and in part by how labor-intensive it is to build a steel frame wrapped in a wooden structure wrapped in fabric, and it took a lot of materials. There were people looking for Merlins, for Mosquitoes and Lancasters and Spitfires and Mustangs, and so because of all the resources it took to build the rest of the airplane and its aerodynamic limitations, the Hurricane quickly slipped to the end of the list for priorities.
Even with these drawbacks, the Hurricane continued to fight in some new and unusual roles. One of the most outlandish was the Cat Fighter, or Hurricat, a seaborne fighter rocket catapulted from a ship to provide convoy protection. German long-range FW-200 Condors, in combination with U-boats, were taking a heavy toll of British shipping. To counter the threat, 35 merchant ships were converted with a single Hurricane and catapult system. These ships were designated CAM ships, catapult-assisted merchantmen. CAM ships and their Hurricanes would shoot down at least 9 FW-200s for the loss of just one Hurricane pilot. Unfortunately for the pilot, once the mission had been completed, he had to either ditch the aircraft or bail out close to a friendly ship. When the Royal Navy entered the war, its aircraft carriers were equipped with a mix of multi-role bomber and torpedo aircraft. There were no single-seat fighters. Desperate for a shipboard fighter, the Admiralty turned to the trusted Hurricane. The first Sea Hurricanes, equipped with an arrestor hook, were designated Mark 1Bs. Sea Hurricanes saw action in the Mediterranean, Atlantic, and Russia. It was, however, not the ideal fighter for the job. Without folding wings, it took up a lot of deck space, and its overall performance was lacking. By 1943, the Sea Hurricane was replaced by the more capable Grumman F4F Wildcat, a true naval fighter. In the end, 1,200 Hurricanes were converted for maritime use. By the summer of 1943, the Hurricane was withdrawn from service in England. Hurricane units began to receive a new Hawker fighter, the Typhoon. Powered by the 2,000 horsepower Napier Sabre engine, the Typhoon was fast and heavily armed. Like its predecessor, Hawker had designed the Typhoon with a thick wing. The Typhoon's performance at altitude was disappointing, and like the Hurricane, it soon found a role as a deadly ground attack fighter. Armed with 8 air-to-ground rocket projectiles and 4 20mm cannon, the Typhoon proved to be one of the most devastating ground attack aircraft of the war. The Typhoon would be followed by the even more impressive Hawker Tempest. Equipped with a thin laminar flow wing, the new Tempest was a great improvement over the Typhoon and was considered one of the best low to medium altitude fighters of the war. September 7th, 1942. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Henry Tizard, states, "The Hurricane has certainly outlived what everybody thought would be its useful life because of its value for aggressive action against land targets." The key to the Hurricane's survival was its thick wing and the development of new weaponry. Bombs, rocket projectiles, and large caliber cannon were the ingredients for this renaissance. The Hurricane's thick wing, which even Sydney Camm regarded as a cause for regret, was now one of its best assets.
I don't think the design of the Hurricane's wing ever anticipated the additional stores, bomb racks, rocket projectiles, or even external fuel tanks that grew into the airplane over time. It's because it was a thick wing that it had a lot of structural margins, and it was relatively easy to retrofit these things. As well, the thick wing had the advantage of making the Hurricane obsolescent in terms of fighter performance, in terms of speed, early in its career, and so having tooled up to produce lots of Hurricanes, it became an easy design choice to press them into service as a ground attack airplane, for which it performed admirably when it was no longer really an air superiority fighter.
One of the problems with the Spitfire was the wing wasn't thick enough to find a good solution for both putting retractable gear into the wing and also putting the armament you needed. It was much easier on airplanes with a thicker wing to put the fuel tanks and the armament and the gear attraction.
The Hurricane, armed to the teeth with weapons, fought bravely on. Number 6 Squadron, newly transferred to the Balkan Air Force, would prove to be the longest-serving Hurricane squadron in the RAF. With just a week before Germany's surrender, the Hurricanes of Number 6 Squadron attacked 16 German troopships in the Gulf of Trieste. War for the Hurricane in Europe was finally over. As the role of the Hurricane faded in Europe, on the other side of the world, the Hurricane would battle on to the bitter end. After the fall of Singapore, British and Indian forces would continue to fight Japanese forces in Burma. The Burma campaign was one of the longest of the war. During the summer of 1942, Hurricanes began to arrive at a rate of 50 a week. By September 1943, the RAF had over 1,000 Hurricanes in theatre. But victory would not come easily. Spring 1944. The Japanese prepared to invade India. By March, the Imphal Plain and the garrison town of Kohima were surrounded. Here, RAF air superiority won the day. While Spitfire Mark 8s cleared the skies of Japanese fighters, 10 squadrons of Hurricanes pounded the Japanese forces below. By July, the siege was over. Over that period, Hurricanes flew 6,000 sorties. In the final months of the war, the Hurricane was replaced by Spitfires and the massive P-47 Thunderbolt. When Japan finally surrendered, 3 squadrons of Hurricanes were still in frontline service. Armed with cannon, rockets, bombs, and the newly developed napalm, the Hurricane remained a formidable weapon during the last 4 years of the war. Its versatility points to a fascinating paradox in the Hurricane story. For an aircraft of such a transitional design, the Hurricane was both modern and dated, revolutionary and conventional. At its core, the Hurricane was quintessentially British. A bulldog of a plane, it reflected the nation's wartime character: reliable, tough, determined. After the war, Hurricanes continued to serve. Amazingly, Number 6 Squadron continued to fly the Hurricane as an Army cooperation unit in Palestine. The Indian Air Force operated 2 squadrons until 1947. The Irish Free States Air Force kept their 13 Hurricanes flying until that same year, and Portugal used them until 1951. The last Hurricane to be built by Hawker, PZ-865, now flies with the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. It also appeared in the 1969 Battle of Britain epic as Sir Keith Park's personal aircraft. The arrival of the new jet fighters, beginning with the Gloucester Meteor and the de Havilland Vampire, did not spell the end for Sydney Camm and Hawkers. Turning his attention to the new frontier of jet fighter production and design, Sydney wasted no time in producing the Hawker Seahawk. On September 3rd, 1948, the first prototype took to the air. In 1949, Hawker would receive an order for 151 Seahawks. The Hawker Hunter, the last in a long line of outstanding fighters designed by Sydney Camm. The genius of his design began with the Hawker Fury, the most successful biplane fighter of the 1930s. World War II would see the contributions made by the incomparable Hurricane, Typhoon, and Tempest. The Hunter was a Cold War classic. Considered by many as the best-looking and best-handling combat fighter of the 1950s, the Hunter would serve the RAF well into the 1960s. The crown in Sydney Camm's career would have to be the Hawker Siddeley Harrier. Far from the fabric and wood of the Hurricane, the Harrier was truly revolutionary. Powered by a Pegasus vectored thrust turbofan engine, the Harrier was the world's first vertical takeoff and landing fighter. Among all of Camm's rich achievements, the Hurricane has to be the most significant. Without his persistence, the future history of Britain, even mankind, might have been very different. As a tribute, Flight magazine said it best. Without detracting in any way from the magnificent courage, skill and endurance of the fighter pilots, the British victory was in some measure due to Hawkers, who produced the aircraft in time and sufficient numbers to enable the pilots to turn the day.
A lot has been said about the Hurricane, the Spitfire, and the Bf-109 in terms of which is the best fighter. And I think the most honest answer is that a good pilot will fly his airplane to its peculiar strengths and avoid being worked into a corner where he suffers from its weaknesses. And there were exceptionally capable pilots in Hurricanes, Spitfires, and 109s.
The summer of 1940 was a moment in which the world was convinced Hitler's Germany would prevail. It was the Hurricane that helped turn the tide. For the first time, Nazi invincibility had been defeated. The once distant hope for victory was now a clear and unstoppable reality.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the Dronescapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.